Welcome to the GovForward multi-cloud webinar series brought to you by Caresoft and Government Executive Media Group. I'm James Hansen, the Vice President and Publisher of NextGov, the Federal Technology News Division of Government Executive Media Group. Through this series, we're featuring more than 30 technology experts covering virtually all facets of cloud security. These FedRAMP marketplace and multi-cloud technology thought leaders will highlight how their solutions enable agencies to address network security, data, and IT modernization challenges. You can see the full schedule of programs along with hundreds of related resources at caresoft.com/govforward. And now I hope you enjoy today's webinar.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Matt Moulton, Senior Sales Engineer with Zscaler Federal, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webcast, Transforming Federal Security for a Mobile World. This is presented by Zscaler and Caresoft and is part of the GovForward multi-cloud webcast series. In today's digital world, government networks face not only increased strain and complexity on bandwidth, but also cybersecurity risks. New policies such as CISA's TIC 3.0 provide guidance on how to address these risks, including shifting the approach from securing a single network boundary to a distributed architecture. However, many agencies' previous TIC 2.0 security architectures remain focused on securing the data center, rather than identifying and providing secure access for the user or device, regardless where the user resides in the app that they're accessing. How can agencies truly support the secure access needs of their apps and services, especially as they've been migrating to the cloud? And more so, how do agencies enable their users to work remotely while still providing the security for application access? Today, we're exploring new frameworks such as Gartner's Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE, and discussing the next steps in the cloud modernization journey powered by TIC 3.0 to secure today's cloud and mobile government. Before we get started, though, I'd like to go over a couple housekeeping items. At the bottom of the platform, you'll find several icons, including the Q&A tab, which allows you to ask a question. We have a subject matter expert fielding your questions live in the chat, so just submit any questions as they come along at any point in time. If you experience any technical difficulties during the session, click the help icon and someone will pop in to help support you out. So to kind of get started, joining us today, I want to introduce our panelists. We have Guy Cavello from the U.S. Small Business Administration, who's the Deputy Chief Information Officer. We also have Sanjeet Ganguly, who's Vice President of Product Strategy with Zscaler. And finally, Stan Lowe, who's our Global Chief Information Security Officer with Zscaler. Thanks, guys, for joining us.
Happy to be here.
You're welcome.
So to kick things off, maybe some definitions would be a good place to start. Sanjeet, you've had a lot of experience in this, in the space previously in your past roles and now at Zscaler. SASE is kind of a new term, Secure Access Service Edge. What does that really mean, and why should we care about SASE?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt, and certainly a very hot topic that we talk about a lot here at Zscaler. When you referenced my past role, I actually joined Zscaler a few months ago from Gartner and was on the team and worked very closely with the analysts that came up with the SASE concept. And, at Gartner, the reason why, we decided to put a name and a framework around this concept of SASE was because we would hear constantly from CIOs, CTOs, CXOs, line of business owners, practitioners about the challenges they were having. Challenges around agility and how cloud and mobility, while allowing so much agility in certain areas, was taxing the way that people built network and security architectures. We would hear about the concept of data being everywhere and the inability to protect that data using traditional architectures. We'd hear the constant challenge of balancing resilience and uptime with agility. And how do you make the determination of do you become more agile, or do you protect your network and security the way you've built it in the past? And putting all that together, when we started looking at the advice we would give our clients, everything kept pointing back to moving security and your perimeter and looking at it in a completely different way. And from that, the SASE concept, or the Secure Access Service Edge, was born. And essentially what it defined was a new architecture whereby you would, change your perimeter from being either a network perimeter to an identity-based perimeter, meaning that your user, the human, the person, or even a thing, if in the world of IoT, essentially became where you built your security. So that no matter where that user was, no matter how they access applications, be it in a data center, be it in the cloud, or wherever that user might be sitting, today obviously we're all sitting at home, the security would essentially follow the identity of the user. What SASE also defined was essentially moving to a thin branch, heavy cloud model. And essentially the Gartner research was called the future of network security is in the cloud. And what that essentially meant was, in order to provide this identity-based perimeter, your main security functions couldn't live in the data center. If I'm sitting at home and I'm accessing a SaaS-based application, tromboning my network connection through a data center that might be thousands of miles away just doesn't make sense from a performance perspective or a security perspective. And what SASE defined was moving essential functions like your secure web gateway, your firewall, your zero trust, your data loss prevention, and your network connectivity all into a cloud-based paradigm that did three things. Number one, it provided depth of protection. And the Gartner definition defines the ability to look deeply into the traffic going over that cloud security architecture. And they talk about the need for SSL decryption at scale. Number two, it defined performance, meaning that any sort of SASE-based architecture needed to provide compute capability as close to the end user as possible, so that while you weren't tromboning through your data center, you were able to provide the security as close to the end user as possible to minimize latency. And number three, it talks about scale, that any SASE architecture needs to be multi-tenant, cloud native, so that you're not buckling under the pressure of having a massive pandemic cause everyone to work from home. You're able to scale up with those particular challenges. Putting all of that together, Gartner in August of 2019 published this note that I mentioned, the future of network security is in the cloud, and they defined SASE, or the Secure Access Service Edge.
Thanks, Sanjeet. So a couple of things you said there that I think are really interesting. The tromboning traffic to the data center. In the federal government, previously with previous TIC guidance, the Trusted Internet Connection, that architecture used to require tromboning. Now TIC 3.0 came out with CIS's new policy guidance. Guy, I'd be interested to hear from you. As you've been going through your transformation at the Small Business Administration, how did the SASE architecture and then TIC 3.0 kind of help you accelerate your cloud transformation?
Sure. Well, thanks for that question. Number one, we helped them change the TIC policy and modernize it. We had volunteered for a TIC pilot after we moved our cybersecurity to the cloud and saw the true advantages of real-time AI and the cloud architecture helping us. We volunteered with DHS to demonstrate to them that the old TIC architecture of bringing everything back, as we described it, tromboning and the data traffic back, made no sense. So we successfully demonstrated to them and was very happy to see that our work influenced the change to the TIC 3.0 policy and opened up their eyes to other solutions. We couldn't have done it with the traditional methodology of bringing data back to a single point of failure. I inherited a network architecture built in the 90s. So it was a hub and spoke model. So if I lost a fiber cut to a central point, not only would I lose one SBA office, I'd lose 4, 5, 6 states. So our intention was to get away from the single points of failure, move more to the edge and allow people to connect directly. And during COVID-19, everybody sees SBA in the news as far as us pushing out the CARES Act funding for idle loans and for PPP. A lot of people don't know that we're 4.5 times bigger now than we were on March 1st. I could not have done that with the traditional VPN architecture. We would have choked on the limits. By using the edge security, we've been able to make those updates and have that many more people on board. I don't think there are many federal agencies that in a matter of 3 months end up being 4 to 5 times bigger than they were when they started, especially when people are teleworking and not in the office. So we're big proponents, we're big users, and it's really allowed SBA to deliver its mission.
Thanks, Guy. So just kind of follow on question to that. You mentioned you were able to scale and be able to accelerate really quickly. Were you concerned about the perimeter and the security model changing? I know you've been moving a lot of apps to some of the public cloud providers, and given that people are all working from home, how did that affect your security perimeter?
We're actually in a better place every day than we were before. And I do want to clarify, SBA is not in one cloud. We're in like 7 clouds. I mean, I'd like to meet the corporation or the federal government agency that can only be in one cloud. So we're in a hybrid model. We still have data centers. We were able to absorb all of that. And I said the beauty of leveraging the cloud cybersecurity, while the number of logs, the number of users increased 4 to 5-fold, we used artificial intelligence to look at that and help us protect the environment. When we put up, here's billions of dollars, come apply for a loan. We also leveraged things like geofencing because we didn't need someone from North Korea or Russia applying for a US PPP loan, which was starting to happen before we turned that on. So yeah, we've really leveraged the technology to expand, but actually be more secure today than we were a few months ago.
So thanks for that. So I guess kind of shifting gears a little, maybe Stan, we could pivot over to you. We think about like with this, TIC policy is allowed. How does this, thinking about TIC and the SASE, they sort of seem to merge together in my mind. Mm-hmm. Where do you see you go after you adopt TIC, and how does SASE fit into that architecture?
So essentially, SASE really drives an organization's behavior in 3 major ways, or derives benefits to the agency in 3 major ways. One, it reduces the IT cost and the complexity of your environment. As Guy just stated, hey, I'd like to remind you that we're not in one cloud, we're in like 3 or 4. So with our data and our applications, especially inside the Fed, when they're now starting to take advantage of all the things that the cloud has to offer, and they're putting these applications and their data, and not just in one cloud, but in multiple clouds, that then, essentially, and then, as Guy said, workers working from anywhere, and then essentially, connecting to those applications, and the workforce is growing all at the same time, essentially the traditional network model and the traditional security model sort of reached its limit. I mean, and in order to compensate, the organizations are really deploying additional services to sort of step into that gap between the traditional network security architecture and the traditional IT and network architecture and a cloud architecture, which then drives complexity into the organization as well as driving up cost, because you're basically trying to compensate for an architecture that was not built to be able to sustain that. So one of the cool things about the SASE model and TIC 3.0 and its ability to integrate with one another, the concept of operations, is that helps you drive down that cost and complexity, because as more complex that we get, my little guy fell off, the more complex our organizations get, the more it costs. And when I was in the VA, we had hugely complex things, and every time we wanted to do something, we would buy a tool to compensate or solve a little problem. So essentially, and our legacy architectures weren't built to be able to support the tools and technologies that our businesses wanted to use to be able to deliver mission, like deliver loans and things like that. So driving out, using the SASE model and using the ability to leverage TIC 3.0 to be able to provide access to that in fact actually provides that security perimeter and pushes that out towards, as Sanjit said, which is the closest point of access, which is the user, and based upon identity and based upon the device. That actually reduces your complexity in your network. So you're not trying to protect that network. You're trying to protect the access to applications and data based upon the user's identity and their permissions to be able to access that. The second part of that is something that we often in the federal space, we give a little bit of lip service to, but we don't really try and do a whole lot about, which is delivering a great user experience. Because in my experience, we always did unto our users rather doing for our users, which means we impose tools, technologies, and procedures on top of them to be able to support that the technology or the tools that they wanted to use. We would make them so complex to use that they were just like, nah, we're not going to do this anymore. This is terrible. Why would we use them? And they'll find essentially a way around what you're doing, which then developed into a problem that both Guy and I both have experienced, which is shadow IT in our organizations. So the cool thing about what SASE does is it focuses on the user, both putting the perimeter around the user and focusing on how the user interacts with applications and data, and then basically drives your focus onto making sure that your users have that great user experience that then allows them to be able to joyfully, and I'm not kidding, joyfully use the tools and technologies that you provide, because then it allows them to be able to have that same experience that they had in a legacy data center while working, as Guy said, and all of his new employees working all over the place, all over the country now, and being able to have that same access to applications and data seamlessly and have that great user experience. And the third one rather, I'm adding stuff, reduces the risk. So as it sounds a little contrary to traditional methodology by if you push your perimeter out to your endpoint, logically you would think that increases your perimeter. It doesn't. It actually shrinks your perimeter and actually around to that individual. It's much easier to protect the identity of the individual on the device than it is trying to protect the network, because as we've all discovered now, and a really good friend of mine, Gary Hayslip, who's the CISO now at SoftBank, we were talking, we said Internet of Things, it's the Internet of this, it's Internet of that. He said that it's now the Internet of everything. Because, and we basically said, there is no way that we can use the internet as a transport mechanism. Well, this sort of has proved us, incorrect. The internet's pretty stable and we can use it. And the cool thing about it is being able to, as you shrink your perimeter around that end user, that actually reduces the risk in your attack surface from your organization. Plus, at the same time, with Tech 3.0 and SASE, it still allows you to do the feeds and provide the intelligence and the actionable IOCs that are occurring around the user perimeter to DHS to be able to act upon those. So again, risk is about identification and avoidance, identifying, knowing what your people are trying to do, understanding how they're doing it, and being able to control that with that ubiquitous policy application, no matter where they pop up on the network, is one of the key indicators of, or key benefits of the SASE model paired with tech.
If I can just add on to Stan, great points, by the way, Stan. So you were talking to a CISO just the other day, and he made an interesting comment. He said, before COVID, he was managing 45 branches, and now he said he's managing 13,000 branches. Every user is now their own branch office. And the only way to really manage that is through an identity-based perimeter. A couple of the points that I'll mention, that really set my mind going. One of them was about complexity, right? The thing that we used to hear Gartner all the time complains was just about how difficult it was to manage a heterogeneous security and network stack. If you think about the number of different CLIs and interfaces and different vendors that you are managing, it became a massive challenge to be agile when you're forced to learn the equipment, keep up with equipment that often isn't well integrated, often is obsolete, and causes a lot of problems. The other thing we used to hear, and this ties into the other piece you said about complexity, when we used to hear from CIOs, many times the whole concept of DevOps really changed the world when it came to infrastructure. We used to hear all the time, how can my DevOps application development team spin up a new app so quickly and continuously integrate and develop applications? But why does it take the infrastructure team 2 weeks to implement a change, to set up a new circuit? And they were constantly frustrated by this investment in cloud and investment in mobile, but the inability for network and security infrastructure to keep up with that pace of change. And what we're finding is, as SASE takes hold and as vendors in the SASE world start to roll out these solutions, now infrastructure can be as agile as our compatriots on the app dev and DevOps teams.
Right, absolutely, and that's the really nifty thing about this is your time to market for your apps and access to data for your mission areas, because in this area of change, as Guy well knows, you could literally have a new boss tomorrow and they walk in the door and say, hey, we're changing everything that we're doing. We're changing direction. We need you to be able to support this ability. And the best thing about this is that ability to change and scale on the fly to be able to meet those demands, those mission area demands. And really, Sanjay, I never met a security guy that didn't like a tool. So that drove complexity. I've got a problem, let's buy a tool. I've got a problem. And whether or not they actually deployed that or not is something else entirely, but that created complexity in the environment. So, you're absolutely right in that. And being able to take full advantage of the promise of the agility and the scalability of the cloud is one of the key requirements for the government to be successful in the coming months and years, especially with the situation that we're in now, because it's going to happen again.
Great points there. There's a point I think you made there, around security sprawl and the number of branches, and I think it's kind of a good point to introduce Gerald Karen, who's the Director of Enterprise Network Management for the U.S. State Department. Gerald, welcome. Thanks for joining. You might be on mute, Gerald. Oh, we might have lost Gerald. Oh, there he is.
You hear me now?
Hey, Gerald.
Yeah, sorry about that. You got to mute on the browser as well as the phone.
Yeah.
So Gerald, I'd love to hear from you. We've been kind of talking a little bit about secure access service edge, SASE, TIC 3.0, and how branch, the security sprawl of the traditional network architecture prior to TIC 3.0 has kind of made it really complex to manage things. And U.S. State Department, in terms of branches and remote offices, you've got folks all over the place. Maybe talk a little bit, if you don't mind, around how this new TIC 3.0 policy may be affecting how you'll be able to more efficiently deliver your mission in the future.
It absolutely is a great thing for us. The good thing for us is embassies are considered, for lack of a better term, U.S. soil. So some of the FedRAMP guidance and everything, it has to be, on domestic U.S. soil to be FedRAMP that high, things like that. So for us, we're actually doing a pilot of what we call an overseas TIC at one of our posts, where we are able to, rather than backhaul all the traffic from all the different embassies worldwide and then put it out through a TIC, we're actually doing all that security and telemetry at the post and managing the policy centrally and able to go straight out to its destination, like I said, rather than backhauling. I think the other good thing I like in some of the technologies that I'm starting to see is this untethering from an on-premise network as well, whereas I don't have to VPN to my on-premise network to go back out to the cloud. You do that because you want the security and the telemetry and go through the TIC stack and do the SSL breakouts or whatever you may have to do within your perimeter security stack. Rather than me having to boomerang into my on-premise and go back out, I can have some telemetry out there as a service, have all of that, control all those policies, and go straight through there to its destination. I think there's a lot of great possibilities that are enabling a much more mobile workforce, that I think it's just the sky's kind of the limit. And the flexibility that TIC 3.0 provides, I think, really does that. Listen to some of the conversations. I'm a big zero trust advocate. I did the certification. I'll get on the soapbox every day about zero trust. And I hear a lot of people, and I heard, a lot about identity, and people kind of take it from identity. We have to remember, it's not about protecting identity so much as it is the data, because if somebody gets breached, what's the first thing a security person is going to ask? What did they have access to, and what is their exfiltration? So it's really worried about the data. Now, identity is very important. You need to be able to prove and understand who that person is and if they're allowed to access said data. But really protecting the data is the key. So just as important as the identity, as well as the application that facilitates that access, and hardening around the application. Right now, in this kind of mobile world, we're not going to be able to manage all devices, because some people are doing BYOD. I'm not going to manage those devices. So, how do I protect the app that really facilitates the access to the data? So a zero trust aspect, concept, a true zero trust from soup to nuts is very important to understand how to approach it. And I absolutely agree. Keep it as simple as possible. Don't make it complex. Don't throw a bunch of shiny object tools at things, but keep it simple. Understand the concepts, develop the framework that you need, understand your risk tolerance, and move forward.
Great point. And I think you bring up a really good topic of discussion, that sort of fits into this is, zero trust and where that sits. Because, this new architecture, with the SASE architecture and TIC 3.0, there's use cases around zero trust that fit into that. Maybe Sanjit, with Gartner and the SASE white paper that they put out, where does zero trust fit into that, and how should agencies be thinking and organizations be thinking about approaching zero trust as they rethink the security boundary?
Yeah, absolutely. So the zero trust network access is absolutely a part of the SASE definition, and proper implementation of the zero trust network access framework needs to also take advantage of the SASE architecture. It needs to be done in a way that's scalable, that offers connectivity close to the user, et cetera. And so just maybe back up a little bit in terms of why is zero trust so important? The whole concept of reducing your attack framework becomes even more critical when your applications are hosted in so many different types of environments. And so connecting your users and making sure that they have access to those applications and the data that those applications bring becomes critical, but needs to be done in a way that's not using a network perimeter practice application, right? I like to joke that, using a non-zero trust approach or using a network perimeter security is like hiring a bouncer for a club where no one's dancing inside, right? The applications are more and more moving out of the data center. So why do you want to build your perimeter there? And so using a zero trust architecture basically looks at your app, looks at your segmentation from an application perspective and not a network perspective. And so it assumes that all your application connections are outbound, and only users that should know about the app do know about the app, and only the users that should connect to the app can connect to the app, and not open it up so that once you have access to the network, you can then browse and find it. And that's the concept, and that's a very large part of a very critical part of the overall SASE definition, is to be able to provide both cloud security for internet applications, SaaS applications, but also zero trust for private and internal apps as well.
So, Sanjit, that's a great explanation. I'm not that bright, so I have to boil all of that down into Stan's little concept of operations, how I put things in little buckets. And to me, everything that you just said really boils down into four things: granting access to applications and data based upon four principles. One, identity, what we know about you. Are you mine? Are you yours? Are you somebody else's? Are you a contractor? Are you not a contractor? Whatever. Two is where you're trying to access from, on net, off net, good country, bad country, whatever. Three, the device. Is it mine? Is it yours? Managed, unmanaged, BYOD, patched, not patched, stateful, non-stateful. And three, or four rather, is the criticality or the sensitivity of the application or data that you're trying to access. And then make a ubiquitous policy decision that is applied the same way consistently every time that individual tries to access any piece of data or any application. And that's really what zero trust is in a nutshell, for in a very simplistic way of looking at it for people like me, is that's how I managed to get my mind around it. And that's the way I look at this. And that's how internally to Zscaler that we design our architecture to be able to support that concept of operations in that way.
When we talk about, zero trust in the context of getting, visibility to the app, the user, and then the data that's in transit, something I'm hearing as a common theme from everyone is, enhanced sort of logging and visibility and reporting that, SASE and this TIC 3.0 architecture provides. I'm curious is, if we sort of think about, how the agencies are, meeting, the reporting and logging mandates, like with CDM, how does SASE and TIC 3.0 change how you approach your network visibility initiatives? It's kind of open question to whoever wants to kick it off.
Maybe you want to go, Sam. I was going to say, well, that was an awesome question. Nobody wants to touch it. Since I think we got Guy back right now, I'll go ahead and let him kick that one off. Go ahead and repeat the question, Matt, so Guy can hear it and we can.
Yeah, I'm back. That was the biggest blow up I've ever had.
Yeah, no kidding.
I lost network connection and everything.
Hey guys, so what we were talking about is zero trust, TIC 3.0, and the role of how this new architecture provides a lot more visibility to the agency, especially at the SOC side. And what I was kind of curious about is when we think about a lot of the federal government logging reporting mandates like CDM, what sort of benefits are you seeing with the this new architecture as you adopt it? And you're start with you and your organization.
Well, sure. That to me, this has been a win-win for both the security side and for the end users. I just want to take a second to walk everybody back to, for my end users using a traditional VPN, it would mean that they would need to click on about 7 different places on their screen to be able to make the connection. And if it works, they're good for an hour or two before it kicks them out. And then they have to do it again. By moving to Zscaler, they put in their username and they put in their PIV card and enter their 4-digit PIN, and they're connected, for days. So just on the end user side, it's a much easier and much more user-friendly experience. On the technology side, what that means is that my SOC now has full-time connectivity. My patching team has full-time connectivity to be able to see what they're doing and be able to push patches. So like I said, on the end user side, it's a much easier world. They can go for a long period of time. I'm not going to say publicly how long ours is set, where they don't have to revalidate. But for my SOC, we're connected 24/7. Another problem with the VPN is that the end user chooses to use it or not. So if they wanted to use their government laptop and not connect to VPN, but then go to a website that we would normally block through the VPN, they could do that by bypassing it, not activating it, and just using their home network. So it's much more secure on our side. We take all the logs and run them through artificial intelligence so that my SOC knows, hey, did Guy Cavallo just try to log in from London when he's already logged in from Maryland? Or did Guy just try to log in Los Angeles, even though 5 minutes ago he was in DC? So having that great amount of data and then using the power of the cloud to manage it and review it really allows my SOC to be much more efficient. So earlier I mentioned we're almost 5 times bigger than we were on March 1st. So again, without having that type of automation, I don't know how I would support it. And just if I tried to hire 5 times the security people that I had March 1st, the way the federal government hires, maybe a year from now I'd have half of them, but I need them today. So again, using the power of the cloud and the power of AI, along with connecting people to the edge, is really what's allowed us to expand. And we are 99.99, maybe a third 9% teleworking now. The only people in the agency who could not telework is I have some financial auditors who work out of a SCIF. Everybody else in the agency has been able to go home. And then as we've surged all these extra workers, we've mailed them their government computers to their homes. I'm willing to bet that there are going to be thousands of them that could end up working for SBA for 6 months or a year and will never, ever set foot in an SBA office. So again, by leveraging the tools that we have, it's allowed us to do that and to continue to deliver our mission.
Yeah, and Guy brings up a great point. And if I can just kind of take your question, Matt, about visibility in a slightly different direction, when you think about SASE and what SASE is trying to fix, it's trying to fix the challenges to infrastructure caused by cloud immobility, right? Apps more in the cloud, users are everywhere. When it comes to visibility, cloud immobility break visibility too. One thing I hear when I talk to clients all day long is, I'm an IT shop and now I find myself diagnosing users' home Wi-Fi issues, because that's where the bulk of the issues are, is people are at home trying to access applications and performance is bad and they don't have the visibility. So just like, cloud mobility requires a SASE architecture, cloud mobility create visibility gaps. And when you're trying to get good user experience and good performance, it's incredibly difficult to do SNMP polling of infrastructure that's on Microsoft data center. And you're not sticking a network probe in anyone's house. So how do you understand what their network connection looks like? And so one thing I'll just mention, at Gartner, we introduced a new market segment called digital experience monitoring, which was basically built to provide monitoring from the end user perspective. And in fact, with Zscaler, we just introduced a product called Zscaler Digital Experience, which in fact brings that visibility back by now extending the security perimeter to the end user. We're now extending the monitoring perimeter to the end user as well.
User experience, something I think is really important that we got to think about. With this sort of new world we're living in, our users are all working from home, and the traditional architectures that we've been dependent on, where we full tunnel VPN users back into the data center, they just don't work. Something I've heard, and I see in a lot of the agencies that we're talking to is, the cloud migration to Azure and AWS. When you think about a user working from home and, some of the traditional or legacy methods that, we've thought about and how we connect to those clouds, how does that change in the new SASE TIC 3.0 world for someone who's working from home? Guy, I know you've had a lot of experience with that, with your cloud migration. You want to field that one?
Sure. I mean, one of the things I'm excited about it is with the need for us to ramp up as big as SBA has gotten, we were given some HR waivers that instead of the traditional model of I've got to find a cloud engineer that lives in the DC area who wants to come work at SBA, or I find a great cloud engineer that lives in Iowa but never wants to move to Washington because they can't afford it. I've been able to hire those remote workers to work in DC but stay at home. So they're teleworking the whole time. No miracle, I don't have the SBA cloud in a building in Washington, DC. I don't need people to be down the hall from the cloud. The cloud's not where they are. All we need is a secure connection and for them to be able to work. So it's really expanded our horizon on getting very scarce resources to be able to work. I have developers working in multiple states that aren't even close to the DC area that help stand up the PPP and the idle loan portals. So by having this simpler but more secure way of connecting, it's allowed us to do that. And in fact, I have 7 times more people now connecting to the edge than I had on March 1st. So not only during this crisis did we expand SBA, we also continued to leverage connecting on the edge as those new users come on board. And yes, I mentioned earlier, we're in multiple clouds. We're not just in one. We have multiple physical data centers. We're in all the major clouds, but we got them all tied together, and my SOC has that single pane of glass visibility into all of the end user and outside attacks in one place.
Visibility, is something, Gerald, you touched on, particularly around shadow IT, and I know you mentioned your concerns around data in transit. Could you talk a little bit maybe about how this sort of architecture changes are going to enable you to better get visibility to the shadow IT in your network, and the role of, I guess, data in transit, and how you can better protect that?
So yeah, first of all, I mean, going back to talking about zero trust and protecting data, you got to know where your data resides. First of all, you got to know what the categorization or levels of that data is. You got to know how that data flows. You got to know what normal looks like. Because if you don't know what normal looks like, how do you know how to protect it? How do you know what to trigger when it's not normal? So that's very important. Encryption is very important, of course. How do you control encryption, or if you're using a service, how that encryption is controlled as well. So knowing those things is very important, and having that telemetry is very important too, to map that and to map what's normal. Then you work your way back to what is it they use to access it and who needs to access it. But there's also, we forget, and a lot of people talk about, it's always from the user perspective. It's not always a user that's accessing data. And it's not always static, or data's not always static. Data's always moving. There's system-to-system sharing. So you have to understand all those things. So you really got to have the telemetry to understand where your data is going. If it's going from cloud to cloud, on-prem to cloud, cloud to on-prem, all those things, what is normal, what's transactional. You have to be able to have that telemetry, because otherwise you can't protect the data if you don't know what's going on.
So when you think about sort of the telemetry and the different traffic flows, because I like your point, is it's not all of it. It's not always about the user traffic flows. You have servers that are going to talk to the internet. You have cloud to cloud traffic flows. You have the flows are various, and it's a much more complicated story than just looking at the user. I guess when you think about accessing, the cloud services, how do you get the telemetry and visibility to seeing those traffic?
So that's a good question. It depends on the cloud, I think. IaaS, PaaS, you can probably put virtual tools there. SaaS is a little different. You got to understand what's available to you. I have been looking at some third-party things now, because SaaS monitoring is becoming part of the hype circle, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's just a term one group coined. So starting to look into those things. Cloud's a little different. SaaS is even a little more different, because it is mostly on the vendor. But I think moving back, if we are talking about users and apps and devices, though, a lot of people, we've always treated authentication and access, whether it be a system-to-system even, as a linear process, meaning that it's a one-time authentication, it's a one-time access. It has to be a constant check. The gentleman talked about impossible travel, being in Los Angeles 1 minute and someplace else 5 minutes later. That should trigger something. And then what access do they want to access? If they want to access a higher level of data, give them another challenge and things like that. We got to stop treating everything in a linear fashion It has to be a constant check. You have to take all the telemetry of everything you possibly can and understand what your risk tolerance is and have that sliding risk scale, because even if I do authentication, I do access, and they are accessing data, something could change on the device, on the app, or the user, impossible travel, some kind of policy gets triggered. That has to be constantly monitored throughout, and then trigger the appropriate action. So having the telemetry from one end to the other is very important, not just the data itself.
Mm-hmm.
So you bring up an interesting point. When you think about security in the context of operationalizing it, there's sort of two houses. I think there's the compliance side of the house, and then there's the operation side of the house. I think you're kind of touching on this an interesting point where when we think about transforming these legacy hub and spoke architectures and thinking about bringing the perimeter closer to the user, it sounds like that's really going to change a lot about how we think about the compliance and security exercise. It's no longer about, hey, I've got an appliance here and that appliance does something. It's about, well, hey, I've got visibility and telemetry to the whole traffic flows, and now I've got all this intelligence.
And actually, I would say move the perimeter closer to the data, really, in my aspect. But to go on what you're saying, you're hitting on a pet peeve of mine that I keep saying in a lot of my meetings here, as a matter of fact. There's compliance, and I think, the FSMAs and the things that we have to follow, CDM, for example, it's kind of the peanut butter spread approach is what I call it. You're trying to protect everything equally all the time, be 100% patched, blah, blah, blah. But in the zero trust concept, it kind of changes that whole realm of thinking. I'm a person that I say, effectiveness and compliance are two different things. I can be compliant, but that doesn't mean cybersecurity-wise that I'm being effective. But I think that if somebody's effective with their cybersecurity and their implementation, compliance kind of falls in place. But you got to understand what it is you're protecting, why you're protecting it, what's your risk tolerance for that, and then you move forward with effectiveness, and then compliance kind of falls in place to me. I can do all the check marks, and all the NIST controls and 853, but depending on how I do it, doesn't mean that I'm effective. So you bring up a good point, and I think that's a really strong point to make is I can do all those check marks, but that does not equal effectiveness. Yes, I'm compliant, but I'm not necessarily effective.
Yeah, I Gerald, you and I are singing in the same choir, because I literally, that caused me more than one congressional hearing. But again, my approach is the exact same as yours. I focused all of my teams on operational excellence, and operational excellence drug compliance along for the ride, whether it wanted to or not. You cannot use a compliance-based activity to drive operational effectiveness, but you can use operational effectiveness to drive compliance, because it naturally, if you're doing that well, the compliance stuff just comes along for the ride. I equate it, to like, holding up your driver's license to a carjacker and going, you can't take my car. I've got a license and I passed my exam. So, it's effectively, driving your security program using artifacts that existed that were relevant 3 years ago, rather than using the information that you have and using the telemetry you have to be able to actually be able to predict, interdict, and respond to threats as they occur. Like you were talking about, as an individual asks for permissions change, or accessing certain or increasing levels of sensitivity of data, being able to view that telemetry through the flow and make just in time policy decisions based on that is something that is one of the things that SASE is built to handle, Zero Trust is built to handle. And essentially, the platform that we've built is built to handle.
Yes,
I
was going to say this.
Can I get an amen? Amen. No.
I was going to say, you're being generous saying 3 years ago. My understanding, the TIC 3.0 policy was the first update, either 10 or 12 years to the TIC policy.
Oh yeah,
So 3 years, you're being very generous.
I know. I'm a nice guy. I don't want anybody coming after me, man.
Yeah.
Um, kind of thinking, because it's kind of an interesting point. When you move to this different architecture, where you're thinking outside of the data center, you can get a lot better you get a lot better visibility, you get a lot better telemetry about your users and the activity that your users are doing. So your model starts changing. How you think about a federal agency and how um, the SOC is traditionally built to react. When you move to integrated solutions that like Zscaler that have that single pane of glass visibility and doing all the layered protections, I think it's kind of an open question. How does that change for the SOC and what they do on a day-to-day basis? Open question. Guy, did you like you might have said want to say something there?
Yeah, I mean, it's really changed the way our visibility difference is just night and day. One way I can tell is that before we turned on these tools and before we turned on the cloud cyber AI, SBA was reporting malicious websites to DHS maybe 3 a month. And when we turned it on in the last year plus, we've helped DHS bring down 1,300 malicious websites that we've discovered from phishing. So not only impacting the SBA users, but taking those sites out of the world from other governments, other citizens having their information stolen by hitting that site. So we actually have a bar chart of that. It's night and day difference. It's flat and then it's a 90-degree straight up. So that increased visibility is absolutely a must. If you can't see what's going on, I don't know how you can protect it. And what we were talking earlier on compliance, I don't care if I'm compliant. I care if I'm protecting my enterprise. I'll be happy to go to the Hill and be grilled on a hearing on why I didn't follow some policy. But if I've protected the SBA from being broken into, I'd rather go to that hearing than one where we were broken in and I go, but I was compliant. I followed all the guidelines. They're not going to care. They're going to care, did you protect the agency?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the cool thing. One of the things that, when we talked about when we first started this conversation was the extensibility and the scalability of the cloud and being able to do things like SSL decryption at scale, like literally all ports, all protocols, and look for threats in that traffic and then be able to provide that telemetry to DHS that then benefits the rest of the government and the country writ large by being able to report, hey, we're seeing real-time threats in this traffic, and these are the sites that are doing it, and be able to provide that so they then can then package that up as actionable intel for other agencies that aren't necessarily utilizing these tools. So that's sort of a benefit that we get to provide to a DHS by pure fact of that we're doing things that make sense from a telemetry and a security perspective with regards to looking and examining traffic and then providing that intel. Because, cybersecurity is a data exercise. I mean, you're looking for the threats inside that data. And if you're not applying that policy to all of the traffic as it goes by and doing SSL decryption, by the way, at scale, you're missing all of that traffic. Because right now, literally 93% of the traffic on the internet is behind SSL, and the bad guys like that, just like privacy experts.
I think the good thing about the way the tools are going nowadays and the capabilities that they are definitely not probably being totally, but they are definitely closing the gap towards being more proactive rather than reactive. We know we've been reactive and tools would alert and then we try to figure out what's going on. But now it's getting a little more pinpointed where we can be a little more closer to proactive or react before there's much damage done. I think that's the great thing that these tools are able to provide us nowadays.
agree. It's much, we're getting to that shining city on the hill where we're like, yeah, we have a reactive or a proactive security program. I mean, we're getting to where the tools that exist today are getting us one step towards that. And again, it's still going to be a mix of detective responses and preventive responses, but being able to ensure that you have that visibility in the traffic to be able to apply those standards to that traffic is incredibly important for those of us that are on the cybersecurity side, because that's the name of the game. Is if you can't protect access to applications and data, that's sort of why do we exist? And we have to continue to keep marching forward and upping our game by using these new tools and technologies to be able to allow our businesses to do what they need to do to deliver mission. And at the end of the day, that's our job.
Really love the commentary there, because it's an interesting thing when you think about it. Like the way we used to build our protections and how we did our enforcements was sort of indicator based. Okay, I found something, let me go block it. And when you find something, your intelligence on finding something was someone got infected and it's bad, and now I've got to go and do remediation. Now we're at this point where we're not just blocking based off of IP addresses and host names and saying, okay, great, I've done the protective measure to go and block the traffic. Now we're looking, we're in 90% of the traffic that goes across the internet is SSL encrypted. We're looking in the full packet, the full payload. You're looking at the files and the content, so that you can discover shadow IT, like Gerald was mentioning, or put cloud controls so that you can say, hey, I'm going to block people from uploading to unsanctioned file applications, and then also having the intelligence to say, hey, this is malware. There's a signature that this is malware. I've never seen the site before, but it's delivering malware because I'm looking in the packet and I'm looking in the payload. Gerald, were you going to say something?
Nope.
Oh, okay. As we're sort of getting close to the end of this, one last question, a really good discussion. What does the future really hold? What do you all see as the end state in how federal networks will be built, designed, and secured? We've got this transformation plan that we're going down, where we move to getting out of the data center and security. But what is your end game? Gerald, maybe let's start with you, and we'll go to Guy, and maybe we can get some commentary from the rest of the folks.
Well, when you said what does the future hold, if you stopped at that, I would hope a big pay raise. But unfortunately, you went on with your question a little more. So anyway, so I think what it gets us is it puts our concentration more on what is it we really need to protect. Not waste our time, like I said, with the peanut butter spread approach. Understand what's important to us, put our efforts and time towards that, and I think that utilizing the capabilities and as they mature and understanding all the telemetry and all the factors that need to be considered and writing the right policies and putting those in place, you are being proactive in protecting, and then you're able to concentrate on the real things that when they do happen, you're quicker to react and address sooner, so less damage is done. Like you said, don't just wait for an indicator, figure out what's going on, and then go eradicate it. Really proactively upfront protect and understand what it is you're protecting, and put the concentration on the things that need to be protected more than the others. I'm not going to protect the crown jewels the same as your bologna sandwich, for example. I'm going to put my concentration on the crown jewels. But right now, the way some of the federal mandates go, they kind of want us to protect both of those things equally. I think, but things are coming around. NIST did the publish of the Zero Trust guidance. I think that's a good read. I would hope that people look at that and read that. to get a true understanding what zero trust really means and where I think the federal government will eventually go with how they approach cybersecurity.
Guy, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I wanted to close by saying when I got to SBA 3.5 years ago, I asked my security team, how's the SOC set up? And they gave me a list of 38 security tools that they were using. Each one was designed to protect this little niche or that little niche. And then I asked them, okay, so where are our biggest threats from? And I got shrugged shoulders because everyone was a whole. So what I want people to realize, what's coming in the future is we've greatly simplified that. We're down to maybe 6 tools from the 38, not one, but not 38 either. So we don't have our tools attacking each other or having to tell them, don't look at this because I have another tool that's looking at it and I don't want you to attack each other. I mean, what a great way for hackers to get in if you're trying to keep tools from overlapping each other. So the future is simplifying, taking things to the edge. I also want to replace my MTIPS network and connect each office individually, each person individually into our cloud, through the edge, so that I have all the data, I have all the access. And if somebody's computer goes down, I'm losing one person. I'm not losing an entire region because my MTIPS network fiber was cut. So I think the evolution is going to continue to get better. The AI is going to continue to get better. We take data from everything that can generate a log. So whether it's a PC, a phone, a server, a virtual machine, a cloud-hosted machine, routers, we take all of that in real time and let the power of the cloud cyber help us determine what it is. So I think that's just going to continue to improve. Who knows, maybe I'll get down to 3 tools in the next 5 years. But to me, security, more tools does not mean you're more secure. It's just like if you asked anybody for their firewall rules that was relying on a firewall to protect them. I think over 10 years of government firewall rules, you're going to find half the rules canceling each other out because it's just too hard to do. We have to make it simpler, and if we make it simpler, it'll be safer.
Stan, any last words?
Yeah. So really, this boils down into really, from where I see the future for the government. One is between the IT and the security guys having a symbiotic relationship, because one completely depends upon the other, especially as we transition to the cloud environment. Now, granted, we'll have legacy for a long time. We'll have a foot in both camps. But the cool thing is we'll realize benefits that, will benefit the taxpayer by reducing cost for IT and reducing complexity. The amount of money that we're spending for IT in the federal government is astronomical now, and we need to frankly change that. So moving to a SASE model will help us reduce the IT costs and the complexity. And oh, by the way, by doing that, gets us a great user experience, not just for our user base, but for our constituents that we're trying to deliver services and mission to. That's going to be phenomenal. I mean, and the government, again, one of the things that people don't like about government is the amount of time it takes to get those goods and services that we're charged with providing. And 3, all at the same time, will reduce our risk, reduce our security footprint, and provide much better security and reduced risk for not only our internal applications and data and our internal environments, but that responsibility we have for the data that we collect from the taxpayer, their information and their data, and providing them better, more secure access to goods and services that the government's supposed to provide. That's my nirvana.
I like that nirvana. So Sanjeet, your nirvana, we've got, in the end game, we've got SASE on the table. What's the end nirvana to you?
Yeah, we're living through exciting times. We have the opportunity as people in the IT security world to really change the paradigm, and we're living through it. They say, you talk about history. We're actually creating future history where, our kids and our kids will look back and not even remember a world where you had some of these old architectures. So it's an exciting time. I'll be honest, the whole Gartner framework for SASE, one of the big conversations that came from it was, can network and security teams work together, right? There's historically been silos, can we create an architecture that brings those worlds together? So my nirvana, and something that I used to write a lot about while at Gartner, was, hey, the network and security teams have the same goal: provide seamless, secure access to the applications and move the business and the missions forward. SASE does just that, and it's incredibly exciting to see how well it's taken hold, and then where these organizations, federal and commercial, are taking it. Really exciting times.
I like your last comment about network and security getting along together. Traditionally mortal enemies, together now because of SASE. Great. This is a great discussion, everyone. Thanks, Sanjit, Stan, Gerald, Guy, for your participation. Really had a lot of great discussion about, what some of the challenges we're facing in federal government around these, legacy architectures, and, how these new architectures with TIC 3.0 and SASE, and the transformation with agencies' cloud migrations are really unlocking efficiencies and operation and costs, and more effective security. Thank you guys for your participation. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. Just so everyone knows, the full webcast has been recorded, and you will receive a link to watch it again in your email inbox. Feel free to pass it along to your colleagues if you see anyone who might want to watch this content. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.